Queen Camilla stood in her private study at Clarence House, staring at the empty jewelry box that had been passed down through generations of royal women. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the mahogany desk. But nothing could illuminate the mystery that had suddenly engulfed her life. Just 3 days ago, everything had been perfectly normal. The Queen Consort had been preparing for the annual state opening of Parliament, carefully selecting pieces from her extensive collection of family heirlooms. The diamond tiara that had belonged to her great-grandmother, the emerald necklace gifted by her late mother, and the pearl brooch that had been in the family for over 2 centuries. All of these precious items had vanished without a trace. Sarah Mitchell, Camilla's personal secretary for the past 15 years, knocked gently on the door before entering. Her face showed the same worry that had been etched there since the discovery was made. "Your Majesty, Detective Inspector James Crawford, from the Metropolitan Police is here to see you," she announced with a slight tremor in her voice. Camilla closed the jewelry box with a soft click and turned to face her secretary. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. These weren't just expensive pieces of jewelry. They were irreplaceable links to her family's history, each carrying stories and memories that stretched back generations. Detective Inspector Crawford was a tall, methodical man in his early 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of a room. He had handled several high-profile cases involving the royal family over the years, and his reputation for discretion and thoroughness had earned him the trust of the palace. "Your Majesty," Crawford said with a respectful bow as he entered the study, "I want to assure you that we're treating this matter with the utmost seriousness and confidentiality. Can you walk me through exactly what happened when you discovered the items were missing?" Camilla gestured for him to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk. She took a deep breath before beginning her account. "I was preparing for the state opening ceremony on Tuesday morning. Sarah had laid out my gown the evening before, and I wanted to select the appropriate jewelry to complement it. When I opened my personal jewelry box, the one that contains my most treasured family pieces, I found it completely empty." The detective made careful notes as she spoke. "Who has access to this particular jewelry box, Your Majesty?" "Very few people," Camilla replied thoughtfully. "Myself, of course, Sarah, and Mrs. Henderson, my personal dresser. The box is kept in my private dressing room, which is always locked when I'm not present. Only Sarah and Mrs. Henderson have keys besides myself." Crawford nodded, continuing his notes. "When was the last time you remember seeing the items?" Camilla pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to recall the exact timeline. "I wore the pearl brooch to the charity gala 2 weeks ago. The tiara was displayed during the diplomatic reception last month. As for the emerald necklace, I haven't worn it in several months, but I saw it in the box about 3 weeks ago when I was looking for my grandmother's ring. Can you describe each missing piece in detail?" The Queen Consort's voice became softer as she described each heirloom. "The tiara is made of white gold and features 37 diamonds arranged in a delicate floral pattern. It was crafted in 1892 by Gerard for my great-grandmother's wedding. The emerald necklace consists of 7 perfectly matched Colombian emeralds, each surrounded by smaller diamonds, set in platinum. It was a gift from my mother on my 21st birthday. The pearl brooch is perhaps the most precious to me personally. It features a large Baroque pearl surrounded by smaller pearls and diamonds, set in yellow gold. It has been in my family for over 200 years. Detective Crawford looked up from his notes. "These are extremely distinctive pieces. Has anyone expressed particular interest in them recently? Any photographers, journalists, or even well-meaning admirers?" Camilla shook her head slowly. "Not that I can recall. Of course, the tiara has been photographed many times during official events, and there have been articles written about the family collection in various magazines over the years, but nothing recent or unusual." Sarah, who had been standing quietly by the door, cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, if I may, there was that documentary crew that was here last month filming for the historical piece about royal jewelry traditions." Both Camilla and Detective Crawford turned their attention to Sarah. The detective's pen was poised over his notepad. "Tell me about this documentary crew." "They were from Heritage Broadcasting," Sarah explained. "They had full authorization from the Palace Communications Office. The crew consisted of about 6 people: the director, cameraman, sound technician, and a few assistants. They filmed in several rooms, including the main sitting room and the library. They were never in Her Majesty's private quarters. Crawford made a note of the production company's name. Did they show particular interest in the jewelry collection? Camilla answered this time. They asked about it naturally. The documentary was about the historical significance of royal jewelry and how pieces are passed down through generations. I spoke about the traditions and showed them a few less valuable pieces from my main collection, but never the family heirlooms, however, Sarah added. I do remember the director asking quite detailed questions about security procedures and where the most valuable pieces were kept. At the time, I thought it was just thorough research for their program. Detective Crawford's expression grew more serious. What was the director's name? Marcus Thornfield, Sarah replied without hesitation. He seemed very knowledgeable about royal history and jewelry. His credentials all checked out with the Palace Communications Office. The detective closed his notepad and stood up. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Henderson next, and then I'd like to examine the dressing room where the jewelry box was kept. We'll also be conducting background checks on everyone who had access to the house during the past month, including the documentary crew. As Crawford prepared to leave, Camilla asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. Detective, in your professional opinion, do you think this was an inside job or could someone have somehow gained access from the outside? Crawford paused at the door, choosing his words carefully. It's too early to make any definitive conclusions, Your Majesty. However, the precision of this theft, taking only the most valuable family pieces while leaving other expensive jewelry untouched, suggests someone with intimate knowledge of your collection. We'll explore every possibility. After the detective left, Camilla returned to her desk and opened a leather-bound photo album. The pages were filled with pictures of her wearing the missing heirlooms at various events throughout the years. Each photograph told a story, captured a memory, represented a connection to the women who had worn these pieces before her. The thought that someone had violated not just her home, but her family's legacy, filled her with a mixture of sadness and determination. These weren't just valuable objects. They were irreplaceable pieces of history, and she would do whatever it took to get them back. Mrs. Elizabeth Henderson had served as Queen Camilla's personal dresser for nearly a decade, and in all that time, she had never seen Her Majesty look so deeply troubled. As she sat across from Detective Inspector Crawford in the small sitting room adjacent to the royal dressing quarters, her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her teacup. Mrs. Henderson, Crawford began gently, I understand this must be very distressing for you. You've been entrusted with caring for some of the most precious items in the royal collection. Elizabeth nodded, her gray hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. At 62 years old, she had worked in royal households for most of her adult life, starting as a junior maid at Buckingham Palace before working her way up to positions of increasing trust and responsibility. I've never had anything like this happen in all my years of service, she said, her Scottish accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions heightened. I check that dressing room every single day. Every piece has its place, and I know exactly what should be where. Crawford leaned forward slightly. Take me through your typical daily routine with regards to the jewelry collection. Elizabeth set down her teacup and composed herself. I arrive at Clarence House every morning at 7 o'clock. The first thing I do is check all of Her Majesty's rooms, the bedroom, the dressing room, and the private study. I make sure everything is exactly as it should be. Then I prepare Her Majesty's clothing for the day according to her schedule. And the jewelry box containing the missing pieces? I check it every morning and evening. Elizabeth replied firmly. It's part of my security protocol. The box sits on the center shelf of the main jewelry cabinet, and I always ensure it's properly locked. The last time I saw those pieces was... She paused, concentrating. It was Monday evening, 3 days ago. I remember specifically because I was reorganizing some of the other jewelry after Her Majesty wore the sapphire set to the charity dinner. Detective Crawford made notes as she spoke. You mentioned that only you, Sarah, and Her Majesty have keys to the dressing room. Where do you keep your key? Elizabeth reached into her handbag and pulled out a small key ring. I keep all my keys with me at all times. They never leave my possession. When I'm at home, they're in my bedside drawer, and when I'm here, they're always in my handbag or on my person. Have you noticed anything unusual in recent weeks? Anyone showing particular interest in the jewelry collection, or any changes in routine that struck you as odd? Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully. Well, there was that documentary crew last month. They weren't supposed to be in the private quarters, but I did notice one of them, a young woman with dark hair, lingering near the corridor that leads to the dressing rooms. When I asked if she needed directions back to the main areas, she said she was just admiring the artwork on the walls. Crawford's pen stopped moving. Can you describe this woman more specifically? She was in her late 20s, I'd say. Petite, with dark brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was carrying a clipboard and had a small camera around her neck. She said she was the assistant to the director, but I don't recall seeing her with the main crew when they were filming. What did you do when you found her in the corridor? I escorted her back to the main filming area and mentioned it to Sarah. But with all the activity that day, I didn't think much more of it. People sometimes get turned around in these old houses. Detective Crawford made a detailed note about this encounter. Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I want you to know that there's standard procedure in cases like this. Elizabeth straightened in her chair, her expression becoming more guarded. Have you experienced any financial difficulties recently? Any debts, family emergencies, or situations that might have put you under pressure? The older woman's face flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. Detective, I understand why you have to ask, but I can tell you with complete honesty that money has never been a motivating factor in my service to the royal family. I live very comfortably on my salary, I have no debts, and my children are all well-established adults. Crawford nodded respectfully. I had to ask. Now let's talk about the security systems. Are there any cameras in or near the dressing room? No cameras in the private quarters themselves, Elizabeth explained. Her Majesty values her privacy. However, there are security cameras in the main corridors and at all the entrances to the house. The dressing room has motion sensors that are connected to the main security system, but they're only activated when the house is empty or during overnight hours. Who has access to the security system codes? The head of security, Mr. Williams, and Sarah. Her Majesty also knows the codes, of course. There's also a master override that the security company can access, but that would leave a digital footprint. Detective Crawford looked up from his notes. Has anyone new been hired recently? Any changes in the household staff? Elizabeth shook her head. No, the core staff has been the same for years. We occasionally have temporary help for large events, but they're always from agencies that the palace has used for decades, and they're never left unsupervised in the private areas. What about maintenance work? Any repairs or updates to the dressing room or nearby areas? Actually, yes, Elizabeth said, her expression brightening as she remembered. About 6 weeks ago, we had some electrical work done. They were updating some of the lighting fixtures in the private corridors. The electricians were here for 3 days. Crawford's interest was clearly piqued. Do you remember the name of the electrical company? I don't recall off the top of my head, but Sarah would have all the paperwork. They were recommended by the palace maintenance department. 2 men, both middle-aged, very professional. They had to work in several areas close to the dressing room to run new wiring. Were they ever left alone in those areas? Elizabeth thought carefully. I don't believe so, but there were times when I was attending to other duties. Sarah or I tried to keep an eye on them, but we couldn't watch them every single moment for 3 full days. Detective Crawford closed his notepad and stood up. Mrs. Henderson, you've been very helpful. I want you to know that at this point we're simply gathering information. No one is under suspicion. As they walked toward the dressing room, Elizabeth's voice became softer. Detective, those pieces mean everything to Her Majesty. They're not just valuable, they're irreplaceable connections to her family's history. The pearl brooch belonged to her great-great-grandmother. The tiara was worn by her grandmother on her wedding day. If someone has taken them just for money, we're going to find them, Crawford assured her as they reached the dressing room door. Now show me exactly how everything was arranged and walk me through the security procedures. The dressing room was elegantly appointed with built-in wardrobes, several mirrors, and a central island containing multiple drawers and compartments. The jewelry cabinet stood against the far wall, its glass doors reflecting the afternoon light from the windows. Elizabeth opened the cabinet with her key and pointed to the empty shelf where the jewelry box had sat. The box was always positioned exactly here, with the lock facing outward. I checked it Monday evening when I was organizing after the charity dinner, and everything was exactly as it should be. Crawford examined the shelf carefully, noting that there was no sign of forced entry or damage to the surrounding area. The theft had been carried out with surgical precision by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. As they finished the examination, Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Detective, I've found the paperwork for the electrical work that Mrs. Henderson mentioned." The company was called Thornfield Electrical Services. Crawford and Elizabeth exchanged glances. The detective's expression grew very serious indeed. "Sarah," he said carefully, "remind me of the name of the documentary director who was here last month." "Marcus Thornfield," Sarah replied, then stopped as the significance of the name hit her. "Oh my goodness. You don't think—" Detective Crawford was already reaching for his phone. The investigation had just taken a very interesting turn. Detective Inspector Crawford sat in his car outside Heritage Broadcasting's offices in central London, studying the notes he had compiled over the past 48 hours. The connection between Marcus Thornfield, the documentary director, and Thornfield Electrical Services had opened up an entirely new avenue of investigation that promised to be far more complex than a simple theft. His background check on Marcus Thornfield had revealed a man with impeccable credentials in documentary filmmaking, but also some interesting family connections. Marcus's younger brother, David Thornfield, was indeed the owner of Thornfield Electrical Services. More intriguingly, their uncle, Professor William Thornfield, was a renowned expert in royal jewelry and had written several academic papers on the historical significance of pieces in the royal collection. Crawford's phone buzzed with a text from his colleague, Detective Sergeant Janet Mills, who had been investigating the electrical company. David Thornfield's business records show irregular income patterns, large payments followed by months of minimal work. Something doesn't add up. As Crawford entered the Heritage Broadcasting building, he reflected on how carefully planned this operation appeared to be. If his suspicions were correct, this wasn't a crime of opportunity, but a sophisticated scheme that had been months in the making. The receptionist directed him to the third floor, where Marcus Thornfield's production office was located. The hallway was lined with framed posters from various documentaries the company had produced over the years, including several that focused on British history and royal traditions. Marcus Thornfield was a man in his early 40s with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He greeted Crawford with apparent openness, but the detective noted a slight tension in his handshake and the way his eyes didn't quite meet his directly. "Detective Inspector." "Please come in," Marcus said, gesturing to a chair in front of his cluttered desk. "I assume this is about the documentary we filmed at Clarence House last month. Is there some sort of problem?" Crawford settled into his chair and pulled out his notepad. "Mr. Thornfield, I'm investigating the theft of some valuable jewelry from Queen Camilla's private collection. I'd like to ask you some questions about your recent visit to Clarence House." Marcus's expression showed what appeared to be genuine surprise. "Jewelry theft? That's terrible. Her Majesty was so gracious to allow us access for the filming. I hope nothing we did contributed to any security vulnerabilities. Tell me about the purpose of your documentary and what exactly you filmed during your visit." Marcus leaned back in his chair, appearing to relax slightly. "The documentary is called Crowns and Jewels: The Hidden History of Royal Collections. It's part of a series we're doing on British cultural heritage. We were particularly interested in how jewelry pieces passed down through royal families and the stories behind some of the most famous pieces." "Did Queen Camilla show you any of her personal collection?" "She was kind enough to show us a few pieces from her main collection. Nothing extremely valuable, as I understood it. She spoke about the traditions and the emotional significance of inheriting family jewelry. It was really quite moving, actually." Crawford made notes as Marcus spoke. "How many people were in your crew?" "6 of us in total. Myself as director, Tony Richardson as cameraman, Susan Walsh handling sound, my assistant Rebecca Chen, and 2 additional crew members for lighting and equipment. I'd like contact information for all of them, particularly your assistant Rebecca Chen." Marcus reached for his phone. "Of course. Rebecca is excellent. She's been working with me for about 2 years now. Very thorough, very professional. She often does additional research and photography for our documentaries." As Marcus provided the contact details, Crawford asked casually, "Is Rebecca a small woman with dark hair? I understand someone matching that description was seen in areas of the house where the crew wasn't supposed to be." Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over his phone screen. "Rebecca is. She's very dedicated to her work. Sometimes she gets carried away with documenting architectural details and historical features. She's studying art history part-time, so she tends to notice things that others might miss. I see. And how long have you known Rebecca? About 2 years, as I said. She came highly recommended from her previous employer, a museum in Edinburgh. Her knowledge of historical jewelry and artifacts is really quite impressive. Crawford nodded, making a note to check with the Edinburgh Museum. Now, Mr. Thornfield, I need to ask you about your family connections. Specifically, your brother David, who owns an electrical company. For the first time, Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable. His hand went to his collar and he shifted in his chair. David, what does my brother have to do with this? Thornfield Electrical Services did some work at Clarence House about 6 weeks before your documentary crew visited. That's quite a coincidence. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. Detective, I think I should be honest with you about something. David did mention that he had done some electrical work at Clarence House. When the opportunity came up to pitch our documentary, I'll admit that I may have used that connection to help get our foot in the door. How exactly did you use that connection? David had mentioned some of the security features he had observed while doing the electrical work. Nothing specific, just general comments about the layout and the precautions taken to protect valuable items. I used that background knowledge to help tailor our proposal and show that we understood the sensitivity required for filming in royal residences. Crawford's pen stopped moving. Mr. Thornfield, are you telling me that your brother shared information about security arrangements at Clarence House? Marcus's face had gone pale. It wasn't like that. David would never. He's completely honest. He just mentioned in passing that the house had very sophisticated security systems and that certain areas were off limits even to workmen. I used that knowledge to emphasize in our proposal how much we respected the need for security and privacy. I'm going to need to speak with your brother as soon as possible. Of course, but Detective, you have to understand, David would never be involved in anything illegal. He's built his business on trust and reliability. If someone has stolen jewelry from Her Majesty, it wasn't David. Crawford closed his notepad and stood up. Mr. Thornfield, I'll need you to remain available for further questioning. Please don't discuss this investigation with anyone, including your brother or the members of your crew. As Crawford left the building, he called Detective Sergeant Mills. Janet, I need you to bring in David Thornfield for questioning immediately, and see if you can locate Rebecca Chen. She's the assistant director from the documentary crew. Already on it, Mills replied. I've been looking into Rebecca Chen's background. The Edinburgh Museum she supposedly worked for has no record of employing anyone by that name. Crawford stopped walking. Run her details through the system, and check with universities in Edinburgh for any art history students named Rebecca Chen. Will do. There's something else you should know. I spoke with David Thornfield's neighbors. They say he's been living well above his means recently. New car, expensive renovations to his house, designer clothes, all in the past 2 months. As Crawford got back into his car, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a clearer picture. This wasn't just a simple theft. It was a carefully orchestrated plan that involved multiple people and had been months in the making. The question now was whether Marcus Thornfield was a willing participant or simply a pawn in a larger scheme. His phone rang as he started the engine. It was Sarah from Clarence House. Detective, Sarah's voice was urgent. I've been going through our visitor logs from the past few months. Rebecca Chen has been to Clarence House before, not just with the documentary crew. She came 3 months ago posing as a researcher from a historical society, asking to photograph some of the public rooms for an academic publication. Crawford felt a chill run down his spine. Rebecca Chen had been planning this theft for months, carefully studying the house, its security, and its treasures. The question now was, where was she, and more importantly, where were Queen Camilla's irreplaceable family heirlooms? Detective Sergeant Janet Mills stood outside a modest terraced house in South London, watching as uniformed officers positioned themselves around the building. According to their investigation, this was the last known address for Rebecca Chen, though neighbors had reported not seeing her for over a week. The breakthrough had come when Mills discovered that Rebecca Chen was actually Rebecca Zhang, a former art history student at Edinburgh University, who had been expelled 2 years earlier for attempting to steal rare manuscripts from the university library. She had been using false references and stolen credentials to gain employment in the heritage industry. Crawford arrived just as the search warrant was being executed. As officers entered the property, he and Mills followed, both hoping to find some trace of the missing royal heirlooms or clues to Rebecca's current whereabouts. The house was sparsely furnished but meticulously organized. The front room had been converted into a makeshift office with walls covered in photographs, floor plans, and detailed notes about various royal residences. At the center of it all was a large corkboard dedicated entirely to Clarence House, featuring architectural drawings, security system diagrams, and dozens of photographs of Queen Camilla wearing her jewelry collection. "Look at this," Mills called from the desk, holding up a leather-bound notebook. "She's been planning this for over a year. There are detailed entries about the daily routines of the royal household staff, notes about security patrols, even observations about when certain rooms are typically empty." Crawford examined the photographs on the wall more closely. Many of them appeared to have been taken during Rebecca's various visits to Clarence House, showing different angles of corridors, doorways, and room layouts. But what caught his attention were several professional photographs of Queen Camilla, wearing the stolen pieces at official events. "She knew exactly what she was looking for," Crawford murmured. "These aren't random thefts. She targeted specific pieces." In the bedroom, officers found a hidden compartment behind a wardrobe containing several items of interest: high-quality lockpicking tools, electronic devices for bypassing security systems, and most significantly, a detailed floor plan of Clarence House with handwritten notes marking patrol routes and camera blind spots. Mills called Crawford over to the kitchen table, where she had spread out several documents. "James, look at this. Flight booking confirmations to Prague, dated for last Tuesday, the day after the theft was discovered. And here's a receipt from a safety deposit box rental in Geneva, dated 3 weeks ago." Crawford felt his heart rate increase. She planned her escape route before she even committed the crime. This woman is a professional. The search of the house continued for several hours, with forensics teams collecting evidence and documenting everything they found. In a small room at the back of the house, officers discovered what appeared to be a workshop equipped with jewelry cleaning supplies, a high-powered magnifying glass, and tools for removing gems from their settings. She was planning to dismantle the pieces, Crawford realized with growing alarm. If she's already started breaking them down, his phone rang. It was Chief Inspector Williams from Scotland Yard. "Crawford, we've got a development. Interpol flagged a Rebecca Zhang who entered Switzerland 2 days ago. She's rented a car and appears to be heading toward the French border. We need to alert French and Swiss authorities immediately," Crawford replied. "If she's planning to sell the pieces in parts, we might lose them forever." Back at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was meeting with the palace communications team to discuss how much information about the theft should be made public. The story had somehow leaked to several tabloid newspapers, and managing the media response was becoming almost as challenging as the investigation itself. "Your Majesty," said Victoria Chambers, the Deputy Communications Secretary, "we're recommending minimal disclosure at this point, simply confirming that there has been a security incident and that the matter is being investigated by police." Camilla sat quietly for a moment, looking out the window at the gardens where she often walked to clear her mind. "Victoria, I understand the need for discretion, but these pieces represent more than just royal property. They're part of our nation's heritage. If someone is attempting to sell them abroad, perhaps public awareness might help recover them." Sarah entered the room with a troubled expression. "Your Majesty, Detective Inspector Crawford is on the phone. He says it's urgent." Camilla took the call in her private study, closing the door for privacy. Crawford's voice was tense as he updated her on the investigation's progress. "Your Majesty, we've identified the primary suspect as Rebecca Zhang, who used a false identity to gain access to Clarence House. We have evidence that she's fled to continental Europe, possibly with the intention of selling the pieces to private collectors." "How long ago did she leave?" Camilla asked, gripping the phone tightly. "Based on flight records, she left London 2 days ago, just hours after we began investigating the documentary crew. She had this escape planned well in advance." Camilla felt a wave of despair wash over her. "Detective, please be honest with me. What are the chances of recovering the pieces intact?" Crawford paused before answering. "Your Majesty, I won't lie to you. Professional thieves who target specific high-value items often have predetermined buyers lined up. If she's already made contact with collectors who don't ask questions about provenance, it becomes much more difficult. However, we're working closely with international law enforcement, and these pieces are so distinctive that they would be difficult to sell openly. After ending the call, Camilla walked over to a portrait of her grandmother that hung on the wall. In the painting, her grandmother wore the very tiara that was now missing. The artist had captured not just the beauty of the piece, but the dignity and grace with which it was worn. Mrs. Henderson found her there an hour later, still standing before the portrait. "Your Majesty," the older woman said softly, "I know how much those pieces mean to you. We all feel responsible for letting this happen." Camilla turned to face her loyal dresser. "Elizabeth, you must never blame yourself. This woman was a professional criminal who spent months planning this theft. She manipulated everyone she encountered. But if I had been more careful about the documentary crew, if I had questioned that woman more thoroughly when I found her in the corridor, you did exactly what any reasonable person would have done," Camilla interrupted gently. "You were courteous to what you believed were legitimate visitors with proper authorization." Meanwhile, in Geneva, Rebecca Zhang sat in a small cafe near the lake, nervously checking her watch. Across from her sat André Dubois, a well-dressed man in his 60s who dealt in rare and often questionably obtained artifacts for very wealthy clients, who valued discretion above all else. "The pieces are exactly as described," Dubois said in accented English, carefully examining high-resolution photographs that Rebecca had provided. "My client is very interested, but he's concerned about the heat this will generate. Royal jewelry is challenging to move." Rebecca leaned forward. "The pieces can be modified. The tiara can be broken down and the diamonds reset. The emerald necklace can be redesigned completely. Only the pearl brooch would be difficult to alter significantly." Dubois nodded thoughtfully. "My client is prepared to offer 2 million euros for all 3 pieces, but the transaction must happen within the next 24 hours. After that, it becomes too risky." As Rebecca considered the offer, she was unaware that her photograph was already being circulated to law enforcement agencies across Europe, and that her distinctive appearance had been noted by security cameras at the Geneva airport. The net was closing around her, but she still had a head start. The race to recover Queen Camilla's precious family heirlooms had become an international pursuit, with time running out and the treasures themselves hanging in the balance. Inspector Marie Dubois of the Swiss Federal Police received the urgent alert from Interpol at precisely 6:47 a.m. as she was beginning her morning shift in Geneva. The British authorities had tracked Rebecca Zhang to Switzerland, and they needed immediate assistance to prevent the sale of stolen royal jewelry to private collectors. Marie had worked on several high-profile art theft cases during her 15-year career, but this was the first time she had been asked to help recover pieces from the British royal collection. The significance of the case wasn't lost on her. These weren't just valuable items, but irreplaceable pieces of history. Within 2 hours, Marie had assembled a small team and begun reviewing security footage from Geneva's airport, hotels, and car rental agencies. The breakthrough came when they identified Rebecca Zhang checking into a small hotel near the lakefront, under a false name, using forged Swiss identification documents. "She's experienced," Marie told her colleague, Inspector Hans Weber, as they studied the surveillance footage. "She knows how to alter her appearance and create convincing false identities. But she made one mistake. She's using the same basic facial bone structure, and our recognition software picked up on that." Meanwhile, Detective Inspector Crawford was on a flight to Geneva, working closely with Interpol to coordinate the international response. He had received permission from his superiors to personally oversee the recovery operation, given his intimate knowledge of the case and the high-profile nature of the theft. Back in London, Queen Camilla was trying to maintain her normal schedule despite the ongoing crisis. She had a meeting with representatives from several children's charities, followed by an afternoon engagement at a local school. However, her mind kept returning to the missing heirlooms and the possibility that they might never be recovered. During a brief break between appointments, she called her eldest son to discuss the situation. "Tom, I need you to know what's happening in case this becomes public knowledge. 3 of our family's most precious pieces have been stolen." Her son's concern was immediate. "Mother, are you safe? Is there any indication that this was more than just a theft?" "The police believe it's the work of a professional criminal who spent months planning the theft. She's fled to Europe and may be trying to sell the pieces to private collectors. What can I do to help? Camilla appreciated her son's offer, but there was little anyone could do except wait for the international investigation to unfold. Just keep this information confidential for now. The palace communications team is managing any media inquiries. In Geneva, Inspector Dubois and her team had located the hotel where Rebecca Zhang was staying, but when they arrived to make the arrest, they found that she had checked out an hour earlier. The desk clerk remembered her asking for directions to several upscale neighborhoods known for their wealthy residents and private galleries. She's meeting with potential buyers, Marie realized. We need to check with known dealers in rare artifacts and jewelry. The Swiss police began contacting individuals and businesses known to deal in high-value collectibles, particularly those with questionable reputations regarding the provenance of their merchandise. One name that appeared repeatedly in their database was André Dubois, a dealer who had been investigated several times but never charged with any crimes. When they arrived at Dubois' gallery in the expensive shopping district, they found it closed with a note indicating that the owner was away on business. Neighbors reported seeing unusual activity the night before, with several well-dressed individuals entering the gallery through a rear entrance. Hans Weber checked with border control authorities. Marie, André Dubois crossed into France this morning driving a luxury sedan. If he's transporting the stolen pieces, he's got a several-hour head start. Inspector Dubois immediately contacted her counterparts in French law enforcement, providing them with details about both Rebecca Zhang and André Dubois. The investigation was now spanning 3 countries, with time running out to prevent the permanent loss of the royal heirlooms. At the same time, Detective Inspector Crawford landed in Geneva and was briefed on the latest developments. His worst fears were being realized. The stolen pieces were likely already in the hands of private collectors who might take them anywhere in the world. Inspector Dubois, he said as they met at Swiss Federal Police headquarters. In your experience, once pieces like this enter the private collecting market, what are our chances of recovery? Marie's expression was grave. If they're purchased by collectors who keep them hidden in private vaults, it could be years before we see them again, if ever. Some wealthy collectors view stolen art and jewelry as trophies. They're not interested in displaying them publicly or selling them. Crawford felt the weight of disappointment settling on his shoulders. He thought about Queen Camilla and how devastated she would be if these irreplaceable family treasures were lost forever. However, their investigation received an unexpected boost when French police reported that André Dubois had been stopped at a routine checkpoint near Lyon. Officers had searched his vehicle and found nothing suspicious, but they had managed to place a discreet tracking device on his car before allowing him to continue. He's heading toward the Italian border, reported Captain Laurent Moreau of the French National Police. We're maintaining surveillance at a distance to avoid spooking him. Inspector Dubois studied the map showing Dubois' route. If he crosses into Italy, he'll be heading toward some of the most exclusive private collections in Europe. Milan and Florence have several collectors known for acquiring pieces without asking too many questions. Crawford made the decision to travel to France to join the surveillance operation. We can't let those pieces disappear into a private vault. Every hour that passes makes recovery less likely. As the international investigation continued, Rebecca Zhang was becoming increasingly nervous. Her original plan had been to complete the sale and disappear with her payment. But the longer the process took, the greater the risk of being caught. She knew that by now the British authorities would have discovered her real identity and begun tracking her movements. From her new hiding place in a small town near the French-Swiss border, she called André Dubois on a secure phone. The situation has become too dangerous, she told him. I think we should abandon the transaction and I'll try to find another buyer. Dubois was quiet for a moment. My client is very close to finalizing the purchase. He's agreed to the full asking price of 2 million euros. If you can meet us in Milan tomorrow evening, we can complete the transaction. Rebecca weighed her options. 2 million euros would allow her to disappear completely, to create a new identity in a country with no extradition treaty with Britain. But getting to Milan meant staying in Europe for another day, increasing the risk of capture. One more day, she agreed. But after that, I'm gone regardless of whether the sale goes through. Unknown to both Rebecca and Dubois, their conversation was being monitored by intelligence services, who had been tracking communications between known art thieves and suspicious dealers. The location for the final exchange had been identified. A private villa outside Milan owned by a reclusive collector, known for his acquisitions of questionable legality. The race to recover Queen Camilla's missing heirlooms was entering its final phase, with law enforcement agencies from 4 countries converging on northern Italy for what they hoped would be the successful conclusion of an international manhunt. Back at Clarence House, Queen Camilla maintained her composure during her public engagements, but those closest to her could see the strain she was under. The thought that her family's precious heritage might be lost forever was almost unbearable, but she refused to give up hope that the dedicated police officers working on the case would somehow bring her treasures home. The Villa Torriani sat majestically in the hills outside Milan, its Renaissance architecture and manicured gardens providing an elegant facade for what Italian authorities suspected was one of Europe's most significant repositories of stolen art and artifacts. Detective Inspector Crawford stood with his international colleagues in a command post established in an abandoned farmhouse 2 kilometers away, studying surveillance footage of the property. Colonel Antonio Ricci of the Italian Carabinieri Art Recovery Unit briefed the assembled team on what they knew about the villa's owner. Giuliano Torriani inherited the property and his collection from his father 30 years ago. Since then, he's become one of Europe's most notorious collectors of questionable acquisitions. We've been trying to build a case against him for years, but he's extremely careful about documentation and never keeps stolen items on the property for long. Crawford studied the architectural drawings they had obtained. If the exchange is happening tonight, where would they most likely conduct it? The villa has a private gallery in the basement, Colonel Ricci explained. It's where Torriani keeps his most sensitive pieces. The room is soundproofed and has only one entrance, making it perfect for discreet transactions. Inspector Marie Dubois from Geneva joined them via video link, coordinating the operation from Switzerland where she was tracking any communications between the suspects. We've intercepted another phone call between Rebecca Zhang and André Dubois. The meeting is confirmed for 9 p.m. tonight. Torriani wants to examine the pieces personally before finalizing the purchase. Crawford felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. After days of international pursuit, they were finally close to recovering Queen Camilla's precious heirlooms. But he also knew that operations like this rarely went according to plan, and there were numerous ways the criminals could escape or destroy the evidence. Captain Laurent Moreau of the French National Police, who had been tracking André Dubois' movements, provided an update. Dubois arrived at the villa 2 hours ago. We have the entire property under surveillance, but we haven't seen any sign of Rebecca Zhang yet. Inside the villa, André Dubois sat in Giuliano Torriani's private study, sipping expensive wine while they waited for Rebecca to arrive with the stolen jewelry. Torriani was a thin, sophisticated man in his 70s with silver hair and calculating eyes that suggested decades of involvement in questionable transactions. André, my friend, Torriani said in accented English, I must tell you that I'm taking a considerable risk with this purchase. Royal jewelry attracts attention in ways that other stolen art does not. Dubois nodded understandingly, which is why my client is prepared to pay such a premium. These pieces will never be seen publicly again. They'll become part of your private collection, appreciated only by you and perhaps a few trusted friends. Tell me again about the pearl brooch. The photographs you showed me were intriguing, but I want to understand its historical significance. It dates back to the early 19th century and has been in the British royal family for over 200 years. The Baroque pearl is extraordinary, perfectly natural and completely unique. Even if someone created a replica, the historical provenance makes the original irreplaceable. Torriani's eyes gleamed with the enthusiasm of a passionate collector. For him, acquiring pieces like this wasn't just about monetary value. It was about possessing something that no one else could have, something that represented ultimate exclusivity. Meanwhile, Rebecca Zhang was making her way carefully through the Italian countryside, taking indirect routes and changing vehicles twice to avoid detection. She carried the 3 stolen pieces in a specially designed briefcase that would shield them from airport security scanners if she needed to make a quick escape by air. As she drove, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every car that appeared in her rearview mirror made her nervous. and she had already changed her planned route 3 times based on her suspicions. Her phone buzzed with a text message from André Dubois. Client is eager to proceed. Arrive through the service entrance at exactly 9 p.m. Rebecca checked her watch. It was already 8:30, and she was still 20 minutes away from the villa. She pressed harder on the accelerator, knowing that timing was crucial for the final exchange. Back at the command post, Colonel Ricci received confirmation from his surveillance teams. All units are in position. We have the villa completely surrounded, but we're maintaining distance to avoid alerting the suspects. Crawford studied the tactical plan one more time. Remember, our primary objective is recovering the jewelry intact. These pieces are irreplaceable. If something goes wrong and they're damaged or destroyed, we'll have failed regardless of whether we make arrests. At 8:55 p.m., surveillance teams reported a small sedan approaching the villa through the service road. Rebecca Zhang had arrived for the final exchange. Inside the villa, Torriani led André Dubois down to the private gallery where the transaction would take place. The room was filled with paintings, sculptures, and display cases containing what appeared to be priceless artifacts from around the world. Some pieces Crawford would have recognized as items reported stolen from museums and private collections across Europe. Rebecca entered through the service entrance and was escorted to the gallery by one of Torriani's assistants. She carried the briefcase containing Queen Camilla's heirlooms, her hands trembling slightly from a combination of nervousness and excitement at the prospect of completing her elaborate scheme. Ms. Zhang, Torriani greeted her with old-world courtesy. I understand you have some exceptional pieces to show me. Rebecca placed the briefcase on a felt-covered table and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted compartments, were the 3 stolen heirlooms, the diamond tiara sparkling under the gallery's lights, the emerald necklace with its perfectly matched stones, and the pearl brooch with its unique Baroque centerpiece. Torriani's breath caught as he saw the pieces. Even in photographs, their beauty had been impressive, but seeing them in person revealed their true magnificence. He picked up a jeweler's loupe and began examining each piece carefully. Extraordinary, he murmured as he studied the tiara's intricate floral design. The craftsmanship is museum quality. Outside, Crawford received word that all 3 suspects were now inside the villa, and the stolen items had been confirmed present. All units prepare to move on my signal. Remember, the jewelry is our priority. As Torriani continued his examination of the pieces, he was unaware that the villa was surrounded by law enforcement officers from 4 different countries, all coordinating what they hoped would be the successful conclusion of an international investigation. The moment of truth was approaching, and within minutes the careful plans of both the criminals and the police would collide in a confrontation that would determine whether Queen Camilla's precious family heirlooms would be lost forever or returned to their rightful place in the royal collection. Rebecca Zhang checked her watch nervously, knowing that every minute spent in the villa increased her risk of capture, but the promise of 2 million euros kept her focused on completing the transaction that would allow her to disappear forever. The tension in the underground gallery of Villa Torriani was palpable as Giuliano Torriani completed his examination of Queen Camilla's stolen heirlooms. Rebecca Zhang stood rigidly beside the table, her eyes darting between the collector and André Dubois, while her mind calculated escape routes should anything go wrong. These pieces are even more magnificent than the photographs suggested, Torriani declared, carefully placing the pearl brooch back in its fitted compartment. The historical provenance alone makes them priceless. André Dubois smiled with satisfaction. My client appreciates fine craftsmanship and understands the unique nature of what he's acquiring. Unknown to the 3 criminals, Detective Inspector Crawford and his international team were positioning themselves around the villa. Advanced listening devices had allowed them to monitor the conversation in the gallery, confirming that the stolen jewelry was present and that the transaction was about to be completed. Colonel Ricci's voice crackled through Crawford's earpiece. All units in position. We have thermal imaging showing 3 individuals in the basement gallery. Are you ready to proceed? Crawford took a deep breath, thinking about Queen Camilla waiting anxiously at Clarence House for news of her family's precious heirlooms. Initiate the operation. All units move in simultaneously. In the gallery, Torriani was reaching for a leather briefcase containing the payment when the villa's lights suddenly went out. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, casting eerie shadows across the room filled with stolen artifacts. "What's happening?" Rebecca demanded, her voice sharp with panic. André Dubois moved toward the room's single entrance. "Something's wrong. We need to leave immediately." But before any of them could react further, the sound of splintering wood echoed from upstairs as Italian carabinieri officers breached the villa's main entrance. Shouts in multiple languages filled the air as law enforcement teams swept through the building. Rebecca grabbed the briefcase containing the royal jewelry and ran toward what she thought was a second exit, but found herself facing a solid wall. The room's design, intended to provide security for Torriani's collection, had become a trap. "Police. Nobody move!" Colonel Ricci's voice boomed as he and his team descended into the gallery with weapons drawn. André Dubois raised his hands immediately, recognizing that resistance was futile. Torriani stood frozen beside his collection, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. But Rebecca Zhang, driven by desperation and the prospect of losing everything she had worked for, made a final desperate gamble. She grabbed the pearl brooch from the briefcase and held it high above the concrete floor. "Stay back," she shouted. "One step closer and I'll destroy it." Crawford appeared in the doorway, his heart pounding as he saw Queen Camilla's irreplaceable family heirloom hanging in the balance. The Baroque pearl, which had survived over 2 centuries of history, was moments away from being shattered forever. "Rebecca," Crawford said calmly, "destroying that brooch won't help you escape, but it will destroy something that can never be replaced. It's just a piece of jewelry." Rebecca screamed, though tears were streaming down her face. "Rich people's trinkets while ordinary people struggle." "You're wrong," Crawford replied, taking a careful step forward. "That brooch belonged to Queen Camilla's great-great-grandmother. It's been worn at royal weddings, christenings, and state occasions for generations. It's not about money, it's about family history and heritage." Inspector Marie Dubois, who had flown to Milan to join the operation, entered the gallery behind Crawford. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Rebecca, I know why you did this. Your student records show you were struggling financially, that you felt betrayed by institutions that promised opportunities, but delivered only debt and disappointment." Rebecca's hand trembled as she held the brooch. "You don't understand what it's like to see people with so much while you have nothing. But destroying that piece won't change anything," Marie continued. "It will only eliminate something beautiful and historically significant forever." Colonel Ricci gestured to his officers to remain still. Everyone in the room understood that one wrong move could result in the permanent loss of an irreplaceable artifact. Crawford decided to take a different approach. "Rebecca, what if I told you that cooperating with us could actually help other people in your situation? Torriani's collection contains dozens of stolen items. Your testimony could help us return them to museums and institutions where they belong, where ordinary people can see and appreciate them." For a moment, Rebecca hesitated. The weight of what she was about to destroy seemed to register with her. The pearl brooch wasn't just a symbol of wealth. It was a work of art that had survived wars, revolutions, and centuries of change. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she whispered. "I just wanted enough money to start over, to build a life where I didn't have to struggle every day." "I understand," Crawford said softly. "But this isn't the way. Help us recover these stolen items, and I'll personally ensure that your cooperation is taken into account." Slowly, Rebecca lowered her arm. The pearl brooch, still intact and gleaming under the gallery's lights, was carefully placed back in the briefcase. Within minutes, all 3 suspects were in custody, and the stolen royal jewelry was secured as evidence. Crawford personally carried the briefcase containing Queen Camilla's heirlooms, unwilling to let them out of his sight after coming so close to losing them forever. 2 hours later, Crawford made the phone call he had been looking forward to making since the investigation began. "Your Majesty," he said when Queen Camilla answered, "I'm pleased to inform you that your family's jewelry has been recovered intact." The relief in Camilla's voice was audible. "Detective, I cannot begin to express my gratitude." "Are the pieces undamaged?" "Completely undamaged, Your Majesty. They'll be returned to you as soon as they've been processed as evidence, which should be within the next few days." At Clarence House, Queen Camilla shared the news with Sarah and Mrs. Henderson, both of whom had been deeply affected by the theft of items they had been entrusted to protect. "Thank goodness," Mrs. Henderson whispered, wiping tears from her eyes. I couldn't bear the thought that those precious pieces might be lost forever. Sarah smiled with visible relief. Your Majesty, perhaps this experience has taught us all to appreciate these treasures even more deeply. A week later, Queen Camilla stood once again in her dressing room, looking at the familiar jewelry box that now contained her restored collection. The diamond tiara caught the morning light. The emerald necklace displayed its perfect stones, and the pearl brooch sat in its accustomed place, showing no signs of its dramatic adventure. Detective Inspector Crawford visited Clarence House one final time to personally return the pieces and brief Queen Camilla on the outcomes of the case. Rebecca Jang had been sentenced to 8 years in prison, but had provided valuable testimony that led to the recovery of dozens of other stolen artifacts. André Dubois received a 10-year sentence, while Giuliano Torriani faced multiple charges related to his extensive collection of stolen art. Detective, Queen Camilla said as she examined the returned pieces, these heirlooms mean more to me now than they ever did before. Nearly losing them has reminded me that they're not just beautiful objects, they're irreplaceable links to our family's history and our nation's heritage. Crawford nodded respectfully. Your Majesty, if I may say so, I think this case has reminded all of us that some things are truly priceless, not because of their monetary value, but because of what they represent and the stories they carry. As Crawford prepared to leave, Queen Camilla made an unexpected request. Detective, I wonder if you might be interested in attending a small ceremony next month. I'm planning to donate one of my other jewelry pieces to a museum exhibition about royal heritage. After this experience, I believe it's important that more people have the opportunity to appreciate these treasures and understand their historical significance. 6 months later, visitors to the Victoria and Albert Museum could view a special exhibition featuring Queen Camilla's donated sapphire bracelet, along with detailed information about the craftsmanship and history of royal jewelry. The exhibition drew record crowds, proving that the true value of such pieces lay not in their exclusivity, but in their ability to connect people with history and inspire appreciation for artistic heritage. The pearl brooch, diamond tiara, and emerald necklace remained safely in Queen Camilla's collection, but their ordeal had taught everyone involved an important lesson about the difference between owning something and truly valuing it. Sometimes it takes the threat of losing something precious to fully understand its real worth.